Hi everyone, my name is Natalie. Today is the first day of my vacation. I just finished working my last day of the year and I thought that I would finally sit down to talk somewhat about the books that I've been reading recently. Recently being since the summer, because I haven't done any reading wrap-ups in the last few months of the year. This year has been strange in terms of reading for me, and I think it mainly comes down to I've been exploring some other interests and hobbies that has detracted from my reading time, and that isn't an issue. I think that is a natural thing for reading to become habits, ebbs and flows, but I have some plans for next year that I will talk about in a reading goals video later on. But I haven't talked about some books that I have been reading in the second half of the year, and so I wanted to briefly talk about those and also talk about the books I'm planning to read during my vacation, my time off for the holiday season. So first off, I thought I would talk about the books I don't have physical copies of that I've been reading in the last few months. So one of them is Urgent Matter by Paula Rodriguez, and this was translated by Sarah Moses. I got this one as a review copy from Pushkin, who is the publisher of this, Pushkin Vertigo, and I was part of the blog tour for this. And I will link the review that I wrote for my blog in the description below in case you're interested. But this is a thriller that have very strong female characters, which is definitely the kind of thriller that I enjoy. The story itself is pretty straightforward in terms of the thriller aspect of it. There is a man who is suspected of a crime and he disappears or goes on the run, and the chase for trying to find him and the repercussions of his disappearance is kind of at the core of this book. But the most interesting part for me with this book was the way the female characters were acting, how they were the most decisive players in this game, in this chase. And there is a matriarch sort of at the core of the story that is just a really wonderfully written female character that is both, she's very powerful and significant in the repercussions for everyone in the book, but also she is portrayed in a way that she seems at first to be harmless and vulnerable. So I love the dynamic of the portrayal of these female characters in this book. I also started reading during the summer and finished in September, I want to say, Saltkråkan by Astrid Lindgren, that is about a family who spend their summer on an island, and it's about their becoming part of the island community. I thought this was just one of the most cozy the most cozy portrayals of skärgården in Sweden, and I think a lot of people associate Sweden with this type of environment, the coastal and island landscapes and traditions and everything, and I think this was a beautiful portrayal of community and sort of becoming part of a new community and learning to adapt to this new pace and environment. And much like the summer book by Tove Jansson, it has sort of that same air to it, the atmosphere. I really enjoyed it. Astrid Lindgren is of course a famous and very popular Swedish writer, but there are several of her books that I haven't yet gotten to, and I'm glad that I got to this one this year. During the autumn I've read two New Direction books that I've enjoyed. The first one is Little Labours by Rivka Galchen, and this is kind of a small essay collection, I guess. It is a essay collection about motherhood, becoming a mother, and being a parent, and it's also about writing. Being a writer, the craft of writing, but also being a reader and consuming writing. So I thought this was really interesting. It's very short, and the format of the essays is kind of like flash essays, the equivalent of flash fiction, basically. Like some of the pieces in this is just a few sentences long. One is called New Variety of Depression, and it says, "It's true what they say that a baby gives you a reason to live, but also a baby is a reason that it is not permissible to die. There are days when this does not feel good." So I think there's definitely several sections of this that I thought were really well put in terms of motherhood, and both the burdens and the weight of responsibility, particularly as a mother in comparison to being a parent in general. But there's also several things related to writing that I thought were really wonderfully put. Lots of writers have children. Sometimes those children write memoirs. It is rare that the memoirs are happy memoirs. There are also descriptions of the looming, hostile, uncompromising door of the Home Office, and I thought, when I read that section, I thought immediately of Christopher Milne's memoirs, where he does talk about A.E. Milne and his relationship with his dad. So there were definitely parts in this that I highlighted and that I enjoyed thinking about, but I would say overall I found this slightly forgettable. I haven't clung to the information in this book as much as I'd expected, but I think it would also be one that I could see myself returning to over and over for the little pieces that I particularly enjoyed in this. So make of that what you will, but I did enjoy it. And the next one is kind of a similar situation where I really enjoyed the reading experience of it, but I don't remember all of the specific pieces in it, nor would I say that I enjoyed the writing on its own as much. It's complicated. So the book I'm talking about is The Rings of Saturn by W.G. Sebald. As you can see, I have a lot of tabs because I did this as a buddy read with Sarah from Hardcover Hearts, and the buddy reading experience of this was so helpful in processing this book, because this book is kind of it's a blend of fiction and non-fiction. It is very much written on purpose to be misleading. There's several reasons that I say the misleading aspect of it, because, for example, there's inclusion of photographs, which immediately makes you think of this as a non-fiction book. There are other ways that this is done through writing, like the use of specific dates, specific names, things, just details that makes this feel like a history book or a memoir, or someone's like scrapbook of facts. And some of it is probably factual, but the overall experience of it is fictional. But regardless whether this is true or not, it definitely plays on the theme of truth and of memories and of memory keeping and archives, and also what the archives, what the purpose is for archives for human beings. And there are a lot of things that I love in terms of thematic things in this book. I think W.G. Sebald has definitely a way of writing that appeals to me in terms of this reflective side of him, and this play with storytelling and narrative is something, again, I find very interesting and fun to read. But I would say that this is sometimes so meandering that it's difficult to really grasp or to keep hold of what is important in it. And so I think overall, as a whole, I really enjoyed the reading experience, particularly because I had the opportunity to discuss it and to process it with someone else, and seeing what we both took away from the book, what we felt differently about, or the things that Sarah noticed that I might have sort of overlooked. So the discussion around it and reading it with that particular way that you do when you know that you will be discussing it, I think was very helpful for me. And I am very much interested in W.G. Sebald as a person, as a writer. And so I have read a part of the biography about him that I can't remember the name of at the top of my head. I had to return it to the library before I finished it, but I want to return to it again because it does talk a lot about the fiction and non-fiction, and the reactions of friends and family who knew what pieces he had used from his own life and from other people's lives. So a lot of interesting context in that book that I will return to. But I think my favorite part in this book is that he is so clearly drawn to the sea and to water, and he reflects so much on like a sailor's life, or feeling himself pulled to the sea, walking along the beach, or things like that. And I just found that sort of as a red thread throughout this that I very much felt connected to. But yeah, I really enjoyed reading this book, and I know I will return to Sebald in the future. I think the next one I'll be picking up is Vertigo by him, and also to get back to the biography about him. I also realized that I never talked about most of the books I read during my vacation during the summer. I know that I talked about the books I read up to the point that I traveled, but two of the books that I read while I was in Italy I never officially talked about, and I wanted to briefly touch on them here because they were fantastic. So one of them I have talked about on Photography by Susan Sontag. I mentioned this one in a fairly recent recommendations video. But this is just, if you are interested in the history of photography, definitely you need to put this on your list. But I think in general, it's such an interesting book because it was published in the 70s, I want to say. And yet it feels so so modern, so of the now. It feels very relevant, is what I'm trying to say. Despite the fact, yeah, 1971 was the original publication, I think. It feels very relevant to social media and Instagram, despite the fact that it has been published so many years ago. It touches on photography in a myriad of ways, not least the definition of photography as an art form is something that she touches on a lot, and sort of the criteria for art and how different people have been thinking about this particular definition question. But some of the things that I found really interesting, again, was the questioning regarding the role of photography in archiving memories, in being a technique of journalism, and of bringing attention to or giving spotlight to injustice or other social issues. So that being kind of a political act of photography, all of the various ways that photography can be used in different contexts, the technology development. Let's see if I can find some examples of things. Like, I have annotated this one so much. Almost every page has some kind of annotation. Like language, it is a medium in which works of art, among other things, are made. So that is somewhat what I mentioned in regard to the art question. Out of language, one can make scientific discourse, bureaucratic memoranda, love letters, grocery lists, and Balzac's Paris. Out of photography, one can make passport pictures, weather photographs, pornographic pictures, x-rays, wedding pictures, and Arquette's Paris. All the photography's program of realism actually implies is the belief that reality is hidden, is something to be unveiled. Whatever the camera records is a disclosure, whether it is imperceptible, fleeting parts of movement, an order that natural vision is incapable of perceiving, or a heightened reality, or simply the elliptical way of seeing. Yeah, this is just filled with so many interesting things, and I cannot do it justice in this video, but I strongly urge you, if you are at all interested in the topic, pick this one up, because I guarantee you will have food for thought in regard to this topic. And as I said, especially in regard to social media and of the use of photography in our times. And the other one I wanted to mention is The Blazing World by Siri Hustvedt. Reading this kind of reminded me of when I read The End of Mr. Y. That was similarly enjoyable in the way that it sort of is a rework of narratives and all of those layers of narrative at the same time of one main plot. This one is about a woman who uses 3 male pseudonyms for her paintings, and she basically is trying to do an experiment of how her paintings are perceived because of the painters being male, and obviously this goes awry, which isn't that surprising, but the discussions about art and about the misogyny in the art world, the interpretation of art and the valuing of art. It talks about contemporary art and again the borders of what is to be considered a piece of art versus just an idea. And just so many different interesting themes that is woven into this story of a woman who tries to do an experiment to unveil the injustice of a system, but ends up being kind of a victim of it. So it's kind of like a thaw autobiography of the painter. And I thought this was just a lot of fun to read and to sort of continue to unravel the pieces of this story. So those are some of the books that I have been reading in the recent past, and I wanted to mention some of the books that I am planning to read in the next 2 or 3 weeks. So we'll see how many of these I get to. First, we have Diary of the Void by Yagi, and this was translated by David Boyd and Lucy North. This is such an interesting premise. It's about a woman who works in an office job. She's the only woman in the office, and she is forced to do a lot of tedious work because she's a woman. And one day she pretends to be pregnant. And this book is about that and how she tries to keep up the pretense, and also how she ends up obviously it's also about the reactions of this and what sort of the reactions of her co-workers and what that means, but also how the borders between her lie and the truth sort of muddle, and she starts to lose track of what is actually real and what is pretense. So this just sounds like such a fantastic premise to me, and I've wanted to read it for a few weeks, so I thought this would be perfect, the perfect time during my off time. So there's this one. And another one that I have been looking forward to is Cold Enough for Snow by Jessica Au, and this is a very slim book about a mother and daughter, and it seems like it's kind of a stream of consciousness style book where they are just walking, and the narrator is reflecting on various things that she's seeing and kind of connecting that with her own life and experiences and stories. And I wanted to read this one for a while again, but I recently saw that Book Nerd Tokyo had done a review for this one. I will link the Instagram account in the description below, and the way she talked about it just made me want to put it on the top of my list. So I am planning to start this one today. And yeah, I think this sounds like it's a very quiet meditation of a book and a mother-daughter relationship and various other things, and that is definitely my kind of reading, and definitely something I gravitate towards during this time of year. Next, we have a very appropriate for the season book, and that is A Woman in the Polar Night by Christiane Ritter, and this is a book about a woman who lives in a classic memoir of a year in the Arctic wilderness, and it's about this woman who moves to the Arctic to, she thinks she will get a lot of time for writing and reading, I think, and it doesn't quite work out that way. In 1934, the painter Christiane Ritter leaves her comfortable life in Austria and travels to the remote Arctic island of Spitsbergen to spend a year there with her husband. She thinks it will be a relaxing trip, a chance to read thick books in the remote quiet, and not least sleep to my heart's content. But when Christiane arrives, she is shocked to realize that they are to live in a tiny ramshackle hut on the shores of a lonely fjord, hundreds of miles from the nearest settlement, battling the elements every day just to survive. This feels like the type of book, again, that I am very much drawn to. The isolation aspect of this memoir is very appealing to me, and the Arctic backdrop feels like a winter-appropriate read. And then another winter-appropriate read, at least from the cover, is The Wisdom of Wolves, How Wolves Can Teach Us to Be More Human by Elli H. Radinger. This is a natural history book about the wolf and what we can learn from them, I am assuming from the title. And it is translated by Shaun Whiteside from the German, I think. And I wanted this one since it came out in 2017 or 2019, somewhere around there. I put it on my anticipated books of the year. I was in a mood for this type of book, and I haven't read any animal nonfiction in a while, so it seemed like this would be perfect for the season, and like something I was kind of in the mood for at the moment. Battery of my camera died, so I've switched to my phone to finish this video off. But the next one I have is Diary of a Film by Niven, Govinden, and this is such an interesting premise in that it is about a man who walks around a city, a European city, I don't know exactly where, and he meets a woman who tells her life story, and he wants to create her life story as a film. And it says, this is a novel about cinema, flaneurs, and queer love. It is about the sometimes troubled, sometimes ecstatic creative process and the toll it takes on its makers. But it is also a novel about stories and the ongoing question of who has the right to tell them. Does that not sound like a perfect premise? So I'm very glad that I stumbled upon this in my local indie store, the English Bookshop, which recently opened in Gothenburg. It has other branches that has been running for a few years. But if you're around in Sweden, in Gothenburg, Stockholm or Uppsala, I highly recommend going to the English Bookshop. They have fantastic staff with a lot of fantastic book recommendations. Last of my vacation TBR is The Book of Disquiet by Fernando Pessoa, translated from the Portuguese by Margaret, Jull, Costa. This is the beautiful New Directions edition, and I've wanted this one for such a long time. This is what is the description that I saw of this? It's like a factless autobiography is one of the descriptions I saw of this book, and it is again kind of like the Rings of Saturn in that it's supposedly examining the truth and storytelling and narrative and fiction and nonfiction blend, all of those things, I think, and also archives and memories, and basically all of my favorite themes in fiction is supposedly touched on in this book in one way or another. I think it is kind of also exploring those themes through the structure, in the fact that it is this pretends autobiography, and the author uses pseudonyms for a lot of his books, so I know that there's that element of identity as well that he plays with, and the author, and the storyteller and narrator. So all of those things sounds like a very interesting interesting reading and so kind of experimental as well, that I always really enjoy. So I've wanted to read this one for ages, and I thought this could be the perfect one to sink into during the vacation, because most of the other books I picked up for my vacation TBR is slim books that I don't think will take me too long, whereas this one I can just sort of dive into and have that as my background reading for the entire period. So there is that. Those are all of the books I wanted to chat with you about in this video. I hope that if you have already started your vacation, that you are enjoying this off time, and in general I hope you have a fantastic, calm and warm holiday season, and that you are taking care of yourselves, and I will talk to you soon. Bye.